Okay, so welcome everybody to week 16 of service security. We have one more week after this. We have a week 17. No, we have two more weeks. We have week 17 and then we have a week 18. Week 18 will be our final presentations, and I'll tell you more about those next week. All right. Um, and today is the last, I will say, coding intensive session that I'm going to be offering. And next week, the topics I'm covering will involve some coding, but it will hopefully it will not be too heavy. It'll be relatively light. It should be something that you can finish pretty quickly. So in essence, you can imagine you have less than 2 weeks to finish up your coding on your project so you can show it to us on week 18. All right, so we'll have some final presentations and things then. Um, if you have questions about what we're going to be doing in the presentations and things, please do wait for next week so that I can give you more information. And after that, you can ask me more questions maybe next week about that. All right, great. Okay, so let's get started. So this is our last session on authorization. There's so much stuff to cover in authorization, and I regret I cannot cover all the things I want to cover in one semester on security. Ideally, this class alone should be two classes because I got a ton more material that I think students would love to know, but we have to wrap up the semester at some point. So I'm going to kind of conclude with authorization today. All right. And next week, we will talk something that's related to authorization, but it's going to be more about browser side security. So we've been focusing a lot on backend security this semester. So I'll just say a few words about browser side security and some other things as well next week. All right. So that's the plan for these coming weeks. Okay. Google, stop reminding me of things. Thank you. Oh, that also reminds me I should turn off my do not disturb till later. Okay. Okay, so let's get going. We're going to talk about a couple of things today. One is about API keys, and the other is about single sign-on and the OAuth protocol. Okay, and I think some of these things will be familiar to some of you who've already done development because oftentimes these are things that you just have to have for any kind of system that you develop. All right, so let's get started. So the first thing I'd like to talk about is third-party access. So when I say third party, I mean another company. What if another company comes to you and says, hey, we love your app, Credence, I suppose, and we want to be able to integrate with your app. We want our customers to be able to use features and services from your side as well. Um, how can we help other companies integrate with us? So, for example, let's say a company comes and says, we love the service that you offer. We wish, and let's pretend it's Credence for a second. I don't think anyone's interested in it quite yet. But let's imagine they said, hey, this is great. We would like to be able to access some of the secret documents that you have because your users are using our service and they would like to kind of import some documents from the Credence application. Okay, so imagine the third-party service with somebody like Heroku, because my Credence application, if you remember, is storing like secrets.yaml and like secret documents like that for projects. So maybe somebody like Heroku says, look, we'd love to be able to integrate with your service because um, the configuration files that developers are storing on your service, we'd like to be able to import them in real time and kind of launch services with that or something like this. Okay, so essentially, we need to have a way that other services or apps can somehow integrate with us. What would they integrate with? Most likely our API, because our API is the one that handles all the resources. In particular, our API is the one with direct access to the database. All right, and other apps simply don't, and other apps are not really interested in our web application or anything else. They really want to talk to our API to get their hands on those resources with permission, right? So we need some way to be able to allow our users, so these are still our users who are accessing their information, but they're accessing it through another service. So we call it third party, meaning it's not our user, it's not us, it's a third entity. It's another service or app out there. So essentially, it's still our users. Okay. How do we do it? Well, how do other companies do it? That's maybe the place to begin. If we look at a company like SendGrid, remember we're using SendGrid this semester to send out email notifications, email validation in particular. How are we using the SendGrid service? If you remember, for example, on SendGrid, you've got to set up, your account and everything, and they provide you some kind of API key. All right. So you access SendGrid or many other services like this by them providing you a key. All right. So what we'd like to do this week is something like that. And in fact, let me give you a little quick demo. So let me go ahead and launch my app and just give you a demo. And I'm going to do everything on localhost this week because there's some sensitive keys that I have to show you, and I don't want to show you my production keys, so I'll just show you my development. Okay, so rake run dev. I've got a little rake task that runs my API. I've got a rake task that runs this as well. All right, my app as well. So give a second to my app to get up and running. There we go. All right, so let's go take a look. This is the one I'm going to look at first, 9292. All right, so here's Credence running locally. All right. Okay, so welcome to Credence. And oh, I've got to log in. I forgot. So let me log in really quickly, and I'm going to log in with my password. Okay. All right. And here we are. We're back to my account, and I've got one project in here. This is my seed data that just some fake data I've seeded into my database for development and testing purposes, right? Okay, so welcome back, Somiare. That's great. I've got a project. I can take a look at the project, and there's some people, and I can add and remove collaborators, so on and so forth. But more importantly, this week, what I want to show you is that I can go to my account information this week, and I get something interesting. This time, other than telling me my username and email and who I am, I get access to the API. I am this week allowing users direct access to my API by providing them an API access key. All right, and in particular, the key looks something like this. All right. For those of you with bright ideas, don't try it on my production API because I hope I'm using a different message key and this should not work. All right. Okay, so I have some kind of token like this. I know it's a big ugly token, but I'm providing it to users if they feel like they want to use this. All right, to directly access my system. So what would they do with this kind of a key? They could give this key to some other service and say, look, I'm using Credence. Here's my API key. Now go ahead and get resources on my behalf. All right, so it's an API key that allows people to get resources. So let me just kind of keep that highlighted or copied, and let's see how we might use it. All right. Let's try. Let me just see if I can open up one of my terminals. Ooh, I got a lot of terminals open. Oops. Okay. So let me open up one terminal here and let's give it a shot. Let's see how to use this. All right. And actually, let me move this over to this window so that I can copy and paste more directly from here. All right. So here's an example of how to use it. Let's say I wanted to get all the projects that I have on my account. So the way I would do it is any other service could simply contact my API. I'm going to show a demo just through the terminal. So they can make a call to my API this week. All right. And all right. So, and then I have to authorization, and they have to pass in an authorization header. Okay. And they have to use this token. So let me just kind of copy this token one more time. All right. And they just have to pass in this token. And fingers crossed. So, ooh, unauthorized request. What happened? What happened? What happened? Let me quickly take a look here. Oh, it looks like I missed something. Did I miss something? Hmm. Error. No, 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 no. It should be fine. If anybody spots an error, do let me know. Authorization. Oh, I think maybe it's something as simple as not having that space there. Ah, there we go. Okay. So there we are. And let me just kind of open this up a little bit so that you can see my request that went out. So my request was essentially asking for API v1 projects. Notice I'm not telling the API who I am. I'm just some third-party service making a request. I'm not telling the API, get me the projects of somia.ray. I don't need to, because what I'm doing is in the HTTP headers, I'm passing in the API key for SOMI array. This is a token that contains information that this is for SOMI array. So right away, my API knows whose projects that I'm interested in. All right, and it's I hope that you can read this. So here it's basically saying here is the data for SOMI array's project. Okay, excuse me. Here is all the projects that SOMI array has. I only have one project. Right. Let's do another one. So I can not only do, so actually, hold on a sec. What was the project number? 47. So let's do another one. This time I'm going to ask for the details of project 47, giving it the same API key. Antenna, here it is. That's a lot of stuff, but this is all the details, including, the project, some basic project information, all the policies of this project. Apparently, I can't do much. Um, and this is interesting. You can see I'm the owner of this project, and yet all the policies are set to false. I can view the project. I can maybe give permission to remove collaborators or something like that. But notice I cannot edit or add any documents. What's going on? I'm the owner of this project. How come the policies are saying not allowed to edit this project? The reason is because this week what I've done is that the key that I'm providing to this third-party service is limited in scope in terms of what I can do. It's a heavily restricted key so that the outside service can't just do anything. It can't go ahead and delete my projects and stuff like that, okay? And I'll show you in a moment how I'm controlling this kind of access. All right, so, and then otherwise there's all the documents and all the information is in here, okay? Um, just to confirm that this is working and not just returning whatever I want, let's go change my key a little bit to make sure it's actually doing something. Let me just change this number 1 to the number 2. So I'm basically breaking the token. And when I do that, I should get a invalid auth token. All right, I'm getting a forbidden error. So my token is working. So what are we doing today? So essentially what I'm doing is I'm saying that users of my system this week may authorize other services or people or whoever is to access the user's resources. So basically, you can authorize a deputy, you can deputize another service to get access to your account details, to your projects, your documents, whatever you want them to be able to read or see or do. Okay, and right, so that's the idea, and the way we're doing it is through an API access key. So you did notice a moment ago that, excuse me, one more. So you did notice that when I was looking at my document, I can see all this information about my document, all right? However, I mentioned that you'll notice that the policies are almost all set to false. This should also be false. I should go change that. So basically, I can't add or delete or edit anything through this key that I'm providing an outside service, okay? The only thing I can really do is view things. I can see things, but I can't really do much more than just see documents and projects, all right? And how am I doing that? Oops, excuse me. All right. So let's talk about a few things that I'm doing this week. So this week, one of the things that I'm doing is that when people go to view using the web application, when they go to view my account, so this is all code from my web application, all right? I'm using a service called Get Account Details. And get account details, like previous weeks, is essentially, or maybe not like previous weeks, but this week at least, it's actually accessing my API to say, hey, this user would like to see their account details, so please give me their account details. And part of what comes back from the account details is, of course, the account information. But beyond that, an extra auth token is sent back, which is the token that's displayed as the API key. All right. So essentially, an API access key is also provided by my API when you look for details of an account this week. All right. So let's jump to my API. So let's go talk about what the API is doing this week. And there's a few interesting things going on. So let me start from the beginning. All right. First of all, it would be extremely dangerous if my API simply gave a completely, um, if it gave an outside service an API key or an auth token with all the things that the user could do. That would be a little dangerous because I, as the user, can do a lot of things. I can edit my resources, I can delete my resources, I can even delete my own account, right? So the auth token that is part of the session of the user that's stored into the Redis key value store is too powerful. The auth token that the user is using when they come in through my web application is too powerful. It would allow people to do anything the user could do, including deleting the user's account. All right. I can't give an auth token that powerful to third-party services. I have to give them an auth token that has a limited scope or abilities so that they can do certain things I authorize, but not other things that I authorize. Okay. So what I'm introducing this week into my policies and scopes and things is the idea of an authorization scope. This is a little bit different than last week. Last week, when we talked about scopes, we talked about all the resources a policy can access. This time, when I mean scopes, I'm going to try to turn the permissions up or down on an auth token. And let me show you an example. Okay, I'll let me show you how I'm doing this, and you'll see how this is integrated into the auth token in a moment. So this week, I'm creating a new, in my web API, so on my backend, I'm creating a new object called auth scope. All right, and let's take a look at how auth scope works. When I create an auth scope, this is going to basically say that for a given authorization, what can and what can this person not do? And this is not talking about my policies. My policies are separate. My policies are about given a user and given a resource, what can this user do with this resource? Okay. This auth scope I'm talking about today is slightly different. This is not about a particular user. This is just saying, given any user and any resource, regardless of the policies, here are some overall things that I want to allow them to do or to be able to do or not be able to do. So for example, here, I'm creating a new auth scope, and in it, I'm defining star::read. Okay, the star means so the scopes that I'm defining this week come in two parts. One is the resource, and the resource here is star. Star just means all the resources, and read means you can view or read resources. So this auth scope is saying that I would like to allow a person or multiple people to be able to read all the resources. Okay. Now, this scope is not associated with any particular user. What I'm going to use the scope for later is when I create an auth token, I'm going to add this auth scope to the token to basically say, here's a token for the user, but you can only use it in the following ways. And the auth scope will say, what are the ways that you can use a token in, okay? So that's how I'm going to use the scope in a second. So this is not yet associated with any token or any user or any resource, okay? It's just a general scope. So, this is the auth scope I'm creating. It says, can read all the resources, okay? So now, let me see if I can go in and demo this in a second. So let me just let me just try to demo this here. So let me just do rake console. All right. All right. And auth scope. Is there auth scope? Is there an auth scope? Yes, there is. So let's go ahead and try this thing. So I'm going to say, so I'm going to create a new auth scope. And then I can ask the scope that within the scope, can somebody read, for example, documents? And it'll say, yes, under the scope, anybody can read documents. Can they read or view projects? It'll say yes. But if I ask, can you write a project? It'll say, no, you cannot write a project. Okay, and similarly, you cannot write to documents. It'll say false. All right. So this is what auth scope essentially does. I can define an auth scope with multiple permissions. So for example, here I am. I'm going to define, let me just make my screen. Let me see if I can make this a little bit bigger. All right. This is a new auth scope. And notice I'm giving permissions to say, can read documents, can write to projects. All right. So I can ask under this scope, if any token or person who falls under this scope, can they read documents? It'll say, yes, they can read documents because this gives permission to read documents. I'll say, can they read projects? It'll say, yes, they can read projects. Why? Because if I give write permission to a project, it implies that you also have read permission. So write permission is a little bit higher than a read permission. Okay. Can they write documents, which means create new documents or edit documents? Now I'll say, no, you cannot actually write documents. You can only read documents. But can they edit or delete projects? It'll say, yes, they can edit or delete projects, right? So an auth scope essentially allows me to define what somebody can and cannot do at a higher level than my user and resource specific policies. Okay, my user and resource specific policies are kind of discretionary. It says, given a user, given a resource, what can this user do with this resource? What I'm showing you here is a higher level policy that says, okay, forget what a user can do to a resource. For any situation, can I read or write certain resources? Okay. And let me show you my code for auth scope. Where is it? It's in my lib auth scope. Okay. So this is what auth scope looks like. This is the code for auth scope. And you see, it doesn't care about which user or which account. It doesn't care about which resource object in particular. It's just essentially a class that allows you to define certain types of permissions about reading and writing, for example. And by default, if you set up a new auth scope, the default scope is can read or write to anything. All right. And then within it are these helpful little functions like, can I read a resource? And basically, the way I figure out if you can read a resource is by looking at the scopes that you passed in. And I say, can this person read everything? Everything is star. Okay. If they can read everything, then they can definitely read this resource. If they cannot read everything, then can they read this particular resource? So then I kind of go through the list of resources. So for example, when you saw me create this auth scope, you'll notice within it, the scopes are, excuse me. So you'll notice within this, the scopes are documents can be read, projects can be written. So I'm essentially just looking through these scopes and trying to answer these questions. Can they read or write a particular resource? All right. So this is authorization scopes. Now, how am I going to use it this week? Essentially, when somebody gets an API access token so that an outside service can use that token to access this user's or this account's resources, along with every single auth token, I'm going to provide an auth scope. Okay. So as of last week, every auth token only had a payload and an expiration date. And the payload was like whatever information you want to put in the token and an expiration date, right? This week, I'm going to add a scope as well. And essentially, somebody gets the token, but they may not be able to do everything that the token allows the user to do. I can now say, okay, this is a token for this user and this resource, but I'm going to provide a scope that limits what you can do with this token. Right? So that's the essential idea of how we're going to use auth scopes. Now, by default, when I create a new auth scope, the default permission is everything, which means with it, my default is that if you have an access token, if you have an auth token, you can read or write to any resource you want. And that's the token that I pass to the web application when a user logs in and creates a new session. And remember, we give them an auth token to the web application. The default auth token that I provide to my own web application is with the scope read and write everything. So this user can manage all their resources 100%. However, when a user comes in and says, show me my account details, and within the account details, when I provide an API access key, I provide a token with much less permissions. And the permissions, and this is in the route accounts. So when you're getting the details of a particular account to show to the user, this time I create a token and I provide a much smaller scope. The scope this time will be read only. Okay. And that's the reason that when I use my API access token to get a particular resource on behalf of a user, I get a token which has very, very minimal permissions. Apart from collaborators, they cannot add or delete or change any documents or projects or anything like that. All right. So that's the basic idea of an API access token. It is an auth token the way we had before, and it's an auth token like we had before for the user's sessions. But this time I'm adding a scope in it that limits what this token can do. Okay. So just to kind of go back to the discussion we had a couple of weeks ago, I think a week or two ago, about policies and tokens. These auth tokens are really a kind of a capability list. They're telling you that here's a key, here is like the access key for a person, but this is what you can and cannot do with it. Okay. Previously, until this week, an auth token allowed you to do everything that the user can do, which is everything. But from this week, depending on the situation, the auth token will allow you to do either everything if you're the user accessing my web application directly, but if you're accessing it through an external service to using the API access key, you're going to get a token with much smaller permissions. All right, cool. Let me see if there's some questions. Okay, I believe there's a few questions, so let me kind of try to attend to those. All right, so Riley asks me, How come auth is written in the lib folder? Um, Good question, Riley. I'm not happy with it being in the lib folder. So actually going back to my code, auth scope is in the lib folder. Riley, the only reason I put auth scope in the lib folder is because auth token is in the lib folder. In a class where I was taking architecture a little bit more seriously, this would be a model. This would not be just some kind of library. Okay, so that's my answer to that question. So forgive me. Um, a proper way to model these things maybe would actually be as a kind of model object, but I'm not doing that right now. Okay. Um, and Yenyu is asking, when will we give users write access? So Yenyu, users, if they come in through my web application, if they come in through my, if they are like, if they come in through my web application, then their session variable, I'm sorry, let me just, hold on a second. Let me exit out of here and let me just run this again, just to make sure my API is up and running. So Yenyu, to answer your question, hold on a second. I also have to start my web app. Is it started? Is it going? Give it a second. All right. So Yenny, to answer your question, the auth token that, let's say I'm Somia Ray right now, right? There's an auth token associated with my session that I created last week. The auth token associated with my session has full permissions. The scope is *:write. I can read and write anything I want. So if I'm coming in through my web application, I have full access. I can add, delete projects, like do whatever I want. I can even delete my account if I added that feature in, okay? So, however, the token that I'm providing for API access here to the user, this is a different token than my session auth token, okay? This is a token that's not meant to be used by the user directly. It's meant to be used indirectly through another application. And this token has a limited scope of read-only. Yenny, does that answer your question? Feel free to unmute yourself and ask directly if that does not answer your question, or if you have another question. You can, okay, okay, great, okay, got it. You can give it to them anytime you want. I'm just as a demonstration in my application, I'm giving them read access only. Okay, so as a demonstration, I'm giving read access only. You can give full access. You can give everything access, right? You can say auth scope : everything. You can give whatever access you want. I'm only giving read only just to give you a demonstration of the fact that from this week, auth tokens have a scope that I can use to control how much access this token has. All right, and it kind of overrides the policy rules, because the policies are discretionary. They're only for a given user and a given resource. All right. Yenyu, does that answer your question? I hope so. All right. So, okay. Okay, great. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, thank you. All right. Okay. Um, so that's auth scope. Now, does this mean that every time I want to access a resource, I have to check the policy and the auth scope? Yes, it does mean that. However, what we can do this week is, and let me kind of skip a couple of slides ahead, is my policy my policy objects this week, they take in three things. Like in previous weeks, most of my policy objects took in two things, like which user or which account and which resource, right? And then it would tell you, can this user read or write or delete or things like that. This week, all my policy objects have one more parameter called auth scope. And what I do this week is when when somebody asks my policy object, hey, can this account read this document? All right. Let's say they ask, can they view this document? Then I still have the policy rule in my policy object, but before I check the policy rule, I first check the auth scope and ask, is the token associated with this request allowed to read things, first of all? Okay. And that can read question mark is a new object that I've made this week, in which I first of all I check that you've provided me an auth scope. If you don't provide me an auth scope, my answer will just be no. And if you do have an auth scope, then I ask, does the auth scope allow for the reading of documents? Okay. If it allows for the reading of documents, then this part is true. But after I've checked the auth scope, I continue to check my old policy rules. So I make sure that the token, the auth scope you're providing me allows you to read resources, and particularly allows you to read documents. And then I ask, and also make sure the account either owns the project or collaborates on the project. Okay. So I'm still checking all the rules from last week, but the difference is this week, all my policy objects, before they check the rule, they first check the auth scope to make sure that I'm currently in an environment where we are allowed to even read documents. Forget which user and which document. Are we even allowed to read documents? Okay. So if I go to my policy objects, where are all my policy objects? You'll see this week, so document policy I showed you, same with project policy. They all ask this question, can you read? If you're trying to edit a project, for example, I ask first, can you even write to projects? Do you have write permission for projects? Then I check, okay, are you an owner or are you a collaborator? Okay, so in the case of projects, can write basically asks, does the auth scope allow you to even write? Okay. So there's a change in how I create tokens this week, to summarize. And the basic idea is that in previous weeks, auth tokens had a payload and an expiration date. This week, I'm adding a scope, which says, it's kind of a mandatory rule saying, are we in a circumstance or a situation where I'm even allowed to do reading or writing of particular resources? So that's a higher level rule than the discretionary rules from our last week's discussion. Okay. And essentially, that allows me to create API tokens, which are just like the auth tokens that users get when they logged in. But in this case, these auth tokens for API access have much more restricted scope by my design. All right. It's up to you in your project to kind of set up your auth scopes to do what you would like them to do. All right. Great. Anything else that I should have covered in here? Let me see. I didn't. One thing I didn't mention is now my web API. Um, when I every time a request comes into my web API now, I assume that my web API assumes that every request coming into the web API, like for example, I want to see a particular document, okay? It assumes that every request comes in with an auth token, I mean, for resources as before. The difference is this week, my web API assumes that every auth token has a scope as part of the token, not just account information and expiration date, but also a scope, okay? So whereas in previous weeks, I would allow this account to do everything the account is allowed to do, this week, I'm restricting it to what the scope is, all right? And the way I do that is, and so a couple of things I've changed in my code is when I start doing the routing for the API, I start by, I've got this new function called authorization, and it's a helper function. It comes from my secure request helpers module. And in that helper module, which I'm including, there's this authorization function, which basically takes the token. And last week, I was only really interested in the account information, but this week, I also examined the scope within that token, okay? And then, and now when I call my service object, let's say to get a document for the user, the API has been requested to get a document, I pass in the auth object, and the auth object contains not only account information, so this is now this is the service object. It not only through the auth object, it not only has access to which account, and of course we're telling the service object which resource as well, but also through that auth object, it has this scope built into it. Okay, so it kind of it can say, okay, this account wants to access this document, but let's just check if the token that they used actually allows them to read or write or do other particular things. All right. Okay. So this is a big change this week in how I do auth tokens. So every auth token now must have a scope associated with it. For the user coming in through the web application, that scope says, let them do everything, all right? And literally my auth scope object has a permission called everything, which is can write to all resources. Write assumes they can read as well, okay? However, if they're getting account details and they want an API access token, then I give a much narrower scope to the token. I say, well, here's a token for the user, but I don't want you to be able to do everything the user can do. I want you to limit you to certain things. In particular, you can read all the resources, but you can't edit the resources. Okay, great. Any more questions on this? Let me just take a quick little break to see if there's any questions on this. Yeah, please go ahead. Yes, yeah, Rona, the answer to your question is absolutely yes. So even though this is a token for the owner of the resource, using this token, they cannot edit documents and projects. Okay. Actually, after this class, I'm going to go fix my policy object so they also cannot change collaborators or anything. They can only read things. All right. Why am I doing that? Because Rona, the wording of your question was even though they are the owner. But remember, the API access token is not for the owner to use directly. The owner could use it directly, but it's actually for a third-party service to use on behalf of the owner. Okay? And because it's not the owner directly accessing their resources, it's another service who's basically getting the keys of the owner. I'm going to restrict the scope. All right? Because once this third-party service has this token, they don't need to ask the owner's permission to do things, right? Like once they have the token, they can do whatever they want. So for that reason, I am giving them a token that really belongs to this owner, but it's much reduced scope because I know the owner will not be using it directly, all right, only indirectly. Does that answer your question? Well, the third-party service cannot do that. The third-party service in my application cannot do that. Okay. Um, so that's kind of the rules of my application. In your application, you can decide, would you like third-party services to be able to do anything they want once they get the token? It's quite risky, right? Because that third-party service can do whatever they want without asking permission. Once they have that token, they don't need to ask the user's permission anymore, right? They can just forget that user and do whatever they want on the side. So that's why I think when you create API access tokens, you should really control what that token can do. It should not be able to do just anything you want. I'm not understanding your question. So there's a couple of things. There's the regular policy, which is this owner can write to this resource, let's say. But then there's the auth scope, which we see now the policy this week checks the scope first. If the scope says no, 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 not allowed to write anything, then even though the previous policy was that they can write, the scope overrides it. It says no, they're not allowed to write, even though the policy would allow them to do so. Okay? All right. So that's why this week I am in my policy objects. I am first checking what does the scope allow, and then I'm checking the policy rule. Okay. I'm first checking what the scope allowed, then I'm checking the policy rule. Okay. So now you may be tempted to say, I don't need this. I would like my third-party service to do anything. But if you have a real-world service, that's not even, there's no way on earth you would ever give a token that allows a third-party service to do anything. Because remember, the only thing that, remember, like for example, a third-party service should not be able to delete the owner's account, right? So even though I haven't specified it this week, one of the things one of the things the API token should never be allowed to do is to delete the account from my service. That's a little too much. And I don't know any service in the world that gives you an API access key and says, yeah, with this you could even delete the user. No, I've never heard of a service that liberal. Okay. We got some other good questions coming in, so let me check them out. So another question is, Shangchun asks, I thought only the owner could see the API key. Can everyone see the API key? No. Good question. So no, everyone cannot see the API key. Only the user, like I've logged in as Somya Ray, so only I can come and see this, should be able to see this key, okay? There's a bug in my system. Since I've logged in as Somya, let me just go to another user's account. Let me just type in Furen. I'm not logged in as Furen, I'm logged in as Somya, but let me try to go to Furen's resource, and it says, bzz, you are not allowed to see the details of that account, okay? So the answer to your question is no, everyone cannot see this API access key. Only the user can log in, and through their account information, they can get access to this key. All right, so only the user can see their own API access key, and they would have to copy this and paste it into the third-party service and say, here is my API access key. They would have to provide it themselves. Okay, that's why I trust a third-party service in any case, because if a third-party service comes to me, I should have drawn the user in this picture. This third-party service, if it provides me an auth token, I presume it's because the user has given it to them. All right. So, and the way the user can get it is by logging in, that's verifying it's them to my service and copying it from their account details. Okay. So Yenu asks, can a third party request the API for an API key? I've never seen that. Oh, good question. Okay. Yenu, actually, your question is awesome, and it's going to be my next topic. All right. So Yenu's question is, can the third-party service say, look, I don't want to ask the user to go into their account, go to account details, go to settings, go to API key, copy the API key, come back to my service, give me the API key. Isn't there an easier way to kind of get the API key for a user without making them do all that? Yenu, there is a way, and that is the next topic in today's class, which is about single sign-on. All right. Single sign-on is all about, one of the big reasons we have this thing called single sign-on, or OAuth, is the protocol in particular, is to be able to get a user to be able to verify themselves with another service and then automatically grant me access to their keys. Okay. That's what we're going to look at next, is an automatic way to receive those API access tokens. All right. So that's going to be the next topic. But before I get into single sign-on, any questions about the basic idea of accessing and of using an API token to authorize third-party services? All right. So this is still part of the authorization discussion because essentially we're now authorizing other services to indirectly to get resources indirectly for a user on behalf of a user. All right. Great. Okay. Let's just take a quick little break, and then we'll come back and talk about. Well, I'm not going to take a full break, but just stretch out in your seats, and then we'll talk about the next topic. All right. All right. Okay. Next topic. So, and Yenyu, thank you for this fantastic question. Getting people to go in, access things. Oh, excuse me, ignore this little words on the side. So, getting people to go into their account, get access tokens, come back, provide me the access token is really painful. Sometimes it's nice to be able to just get some information about a user. Like so imagine my third-party user here. Imagine my third-party service here would like to access some resources from me. Isn't there an easier way to get those resources without getting the user to go this weird way of getting an API key? Most users would be very uncomfortable to go in and copy and paste an API key. It's just a little weird. If you're a developer, it seems very reasonable. But if you're not a developer, if you're just a regular user, that's a very weird experience, okay? So we have a protocol in place nowadays, which is kind of accepted in industry, which allows two services, like a third-party service and my service, to talk to each other and get the user's permission to exchange resources without them going in through the API, without them explicitly getting an API access key. Okay, so the experience I just described so far with API access tokens is really a developer experience, but it's not really friendly. It's not necessarily friendly to users to be able to do this. Okay. Now, this week, I am not going to be showing you how to do single sign-on for your own service. Rather, I'm going to do it the other way around. I'm going to show you how to do single sign-on with another service. So in this case, all right, so let me just log out from somia.ray. Okay. This week, when you go to log into my service, I'm going to give you two options. One is you can register. You can register with my service first and then log in with your registered username and password. Okay. But if you are not registered yet and you don't want to go this route, there's another alternative I'm going to provide, which is to log in with GitHub. And in this case, basically what I'm going to do is rather than me validating your username and email and all this stuff, I'm simply going to ask you, what is your email that you've given to GitHub? And then I'll ask GitHub, please provide me information about this user. So I'm going to use GitHub as a service, which I assume has already kind of validated who you are and stuff like that. So you can simply log in with your GitHub username and password. All right. So that's what we want to do for today. So it relates to the first part of our story. The difference is, so in this case, I am now the third-party service, and I'm going to ask GitHub for details about a user's account and potentially other things. Okay, so this time I'm kind of like the third-party service to GitHub, and I'm going to show you how an organization like GitHub or Google or Facebook, how they allow you to access their resources on behalf of a user. Okay, and I'm going to use that capability to get your account information from GitHub and use that to log you into my service. All right. Okay. Okay. So the way this from the user's point of view, the feature that I'm offering them, log in with GitHub, is often called single sign-on or SSO. Okay, it means you already have an account somewhere else. can we just let you log in with that account instead of creating a new account in my database, in my application? All right. So this is a user experience called single sign-on. And the single sign-on involves three entities collaborating to make this happen. Okay. Um, in this case, my web application is the client application because I'm going to be getting resources from GitHub. In particularly, I'll be getting user account information from GitHub. Okay. However, so GitHub is the second part of this second entity in this story. So my application is going to talk to GitHub. All right. However, I can't just talk to GitHub and say, hey, give me Rona's username and email address, please. Like, that'd be crazy. Okay. GitHub can't just give that stuff away from me, can't just give that information to me freely. We also need the user in the picture. All right. Sorry, Rona, this is you. Okay. Actually, it kind of looks like you. All right. So this is Rona. Okay. And Rona has to be involved in the story, and we have to ask. So I'm going to ask GitHub, hey, can you give me Rona's account information? Because I would like her to be able to log into my service, but I'll just use the account information you have. GitHub will now need to tell the user, will need to tell Rona, look, somebody's asking for your account information. Do first of all, are you Rona? Second of all, do you give them permission to do this? Okay. And so then you have to kind of give GitHub this permission, and then GitHub will tell my application, okay, fine, Rona authorized me to give you her username and email address, so here they are, okay? And then what I'll do in my application later is this time, instead of making Rona register, I will just use that account information to create a new account for her in my system without having to validate her email, because I trust that if GitHub has an account with that email, then that's the correct email for Rona. Okay, so this is the single sign-on experience. Okay, so how is the single sign-on experience going to work? Let's talk about this protocol called that we're going to use. So single sign-on is like what we typically tell users. We tell them, oh, we have a single sign-on, that's the name of the feature. However, there's a little bit of a dance between these three players, between my application, GitHub, and the user. We have to conduct a little, we have to talk to each other. And who do I talk to first? When do I talk to the user? When do these things happen? We're going to use a protocol. So again, remember, protocol simply means it's an agreed upon way to have a conversation. All right. Just like I remember we talked about earlier, when you call somebody, you answer by saying, if somebody calls you, you don't just say, you don't just start talking, you start by saying way or hello, right? And that basically says, I am here, I'm ready to talk. And the usual protocol is the person calling you, they will say, hi, I am, and they will introduce themselves first. If somebody calls you and they don't introduce themselves, it's really weird. Unless, you can see in the caller ID who it is. It'll be very weird if somebody calls you and just starts talking to you. They should usually say, oh, I'm calling from Fubon Bank, or I'm calling from 7-Eleven, or I'm your friend, So that's a protocol for human beings to have a phone conversation. So similarly, the single sign-on experience, there has to be a protocol to say who talks to who, when, and what do you have to reply with, okay? And this protocol is called OAuth, all right? And OAuth is a protocol. There's been different versions of it. It's changed over time. I'm going to mention OAuth Protocol 2.0. There might be a 3.0, but I'm not going to implement that this week. In fact, let me go Google right now. Is there OAuth 3.0? All right, so OAuth 3 does not exist yet. However, so currently there's OAuth 2.0, 2.1, something like that. Okay, so there's no OAuth 3.0. Thank God. Okay, so we're still going to talk about OAuth 2.0 this semester. All right, and how it works. So, and in my application, I'm going to implement OAuth with GitHub. You can implement it with whoever you want, with Google, with Facebook, with Yahoo. Um, Anybody who offers OAuth will be using pretty much the same protocol, pretty much. Okay. Now, some things might have changed since the last time I taught the class, possible. But in my experience, in previous semesters, students told me, nope, I followed the same logic, and it worked with Google. It worked with whoever you want to, because that's the whole point of having a protocol. It shouldn't matter who you're talking to. We should all follow the same dance. We should all follow the same steps. Okay. Now, to show you how OAuth works, I'm not going to show you how it works in my Credence application, because my application and your application is a little bit complicated. We have an application and an API, so we need to discuss later how to do OAuth with multiple, services in the picture. I would like to show you how OAuth works on a much, much, much simpler system, just with a simple web application, not with like application, API, sessions, this, that. Like, I don't want to make it so complicated, okay? So I'm going to show you a very simple example of OAuth in the next hour. And then after that, we'll come back and we'll talk about how to do OAuth for our full application, which is a more complicated than this story, okay? So the application I want to show you this week, so let me go set that up. So it's a new application, and this is a very simple application that I wrote to kind of demonstrate OAuth. So all it does is demonstrates OAuth. And by the way, I believe the code for the application, it's sorry, the next slide is on the side, because previously I was printing out handouts, so there's no problem for you to just rotate this, okay? But I can still rotate it. Can I still rotate it? I can still rotate it, no problem, but you may have to rotate it on your own screen by yourself, okay? But I can rotate it like this. And the code should be available at this website for this very, very simple OAuth demonstration using GitHub, okay? So let me kind of just show you what this application does and how we're using OAuth. So I've got the instructions up here how to use this application. By the way, if you want to clone and use this application, you can. However, this application, I wrote it a couple of years ago. I only updated it a couple of years ago, so it's still using Ruby 2.6.2. So I've got some instructions here if you want to play with it, how to clone it, how to set it up, and things like that, okay? But for now, I'm going to run my application. All right, okay. And let me show you how this application works. So this application is pretty simple, all right? Let me zoom in on this. But it's very powerful, because this application will tell you the secret to life. Oh my God, I'm so excited. Can't wait to know the secret to life. All right, okay, so this is the application says, tell me the secret to life. So I'm gonna go click on this, and um, it'll tell me the secret to life, okay? So how is this application going to do it? So first of all, I need to know who you are. So when I say, tell me the secret to life, it says, well, you're going to have to log in first, so I know some information about you. So I go to log in with GitHub, okay? So let me, let's do that. So I say login with GitHub. Whoa. Notice I am now no longer in my application. If you look at my URL bar, I am now on GitHub. And GitHub is saying, hey, you need to authorize, using this OAuth protocol, you need to authorize a client, another application, to access your account. Let's take a quick look at this window. So it's saying, would you authorize this app called OAuth Demo? That's the name of my application. It's called OAuth Demo. Will you authorize this service to access GitHub? All right. And OAuth Demo was created by Somia Ray, because I happen to be the one who creates it, and it wants to access your Somia Ray account. Oh, okay. And this is the information it wants to access. It's trying to access your personal user data, and it is asking for your email addresses, read only. So it's saying, can I give it permission to, this application will be able to read your private email addresses, okay? Do you want to authorize the service or no? Okay. Interestingly, it gives a few more information down here. So it says this OAuth demo is not operated by GitHub. We don't know who it is. It was created 7 years ago. My God. Well, I've been updating it every once in a while. And it has less than 10 users on GitHub. Okay, that's embarrassing. Okay, anyway, do you want to authorize it? It also says, by the way, once you authorize this, you will be redirected back to this website, which is the website where my OAuth demo is running. It's running on localhost right now. All right. So essentially what's happened is, to know the secret to life, I had to log into GitHub and I got transferred to GitHub. I am now on GitHub's website. Okay. And GitHub is talking to me privately now and saying, look, there's an app. It wants to get your email address. And well, it's asking for your personal information, but only your email address. Do you authorize it now? And once you authorize it, if you authorize it, I will send you back to this address. Okay. So let's say, sure, please authorize it to access the account Somia Array. Okay, so I authorize it. Something happens. It's saying you're being redirected. Whoa, and here's the secret to life. The secret to life is your best friend and your worst enemy is Somia Array. No, that's that's not what I wanted to know. Anyway, that's fine. That's the secret to life. Okay. Yes, Brandon. That's deep. All right. I am my worst enemy and I'm my best friend. I have to deal with both every day. Okay. So this is the idea of the OAuth demo. And now that I know the secret to life, I can. Well, let's see. Let me delete this. Go back to the home page and tell me the secret to life. When I click this time, it just jumps straight and tells me here it is. Okay. So by the way, how does it know that my best friend and my worst enemy is Somi Array? Because I just logged in, so it got my account information from GitHub. So it has both my name, which I did not provide, it got it from GitHub, and it has my email address, which it got from GitHub. All right. So let me log out now, very depressed. I did not want to know the secret to life. Okay. And let's talk about how this is working. Like, how does this whole OAuth protocol work? Okay. So here's a rundown, and I know this is a very complicated picture, but this is the way OAuth works. I promise you implementing it is a little bit easier than what it looks like right now, but I'm going to tell you the full story, and then I'll show you which parts we have to implement, which parts kind of happen relatively automatically. All right. So there's three, as I mentioned, there's three things involved. There's the browser, the user who's at the browser, okay? The OAuth demo web application, which I am running on my computer. All right, so here's all this information. By the way, notice all this information that came in from GitHub. GitHub said that it's going to provide my email address, but actually it provides it a lot more than my email address. It provides it my username, my user ID. Holy crap! I don't know if that should be on YouTube. It provides it my the URL to my avatar, to my my picture on GitHub. It provides it to links to like who my followers are, to like a whole bunch of information, actually, even where I'm located. Holy crap, I didn't give it permission for that, but it gave it all that. And yes, one of the things it gave it is the email address. Okay. It didn't ask for information for all these other things. It didn't ask for permission for all these other things, because all these other things are actually publicly available on GitHub. If you go to Somi Array, if you go on GitHub and look at the Somi Array profile, which you can access publicly, all this other information is publicly available on GitHub. Okay, so the only thing that's really private is my email address. So it asks permission for that only. Okay, whew, but that is a lot of information it gives. Okay, so how does this work? So let's kind of run through this again. And what I'm going to do is I gave GitHub access to the Somi Array account. Before I run through this story again, let me quickly go to GitHub and revoke access to the OAuth demo application. So I can go down to this is my profile page on GitHub. This is my logo. And let me go to applications. And these are applications which can access my GitHub profile. Oh, I don't want to go here. And so under applications, there's authorized OAuth apps. Okay. And you'll notice down here that OAuth demo is authorized to access my account information. So I'm going to go ahead and revoke that permission. saying OAuth demo is not allowed to access my information. Okay, so let me go back to my OAuth demo and let's go through this step by step. All right. So let me see if I can, let me see if I can do this. Let me actually move this to, let me see if I can do them side by side a little bit. Let me see, hold on a second. I may have to view, continuous scroll. Let me make this a little bit smaller. And let's see if I can, excuse me while I just try to. Out of curiosity, can folks at home, can you read like these words I'm highlighting here? Can you, I mean, I know it's very small, but can you read it a little bit? Can you just give me a thumbs up if you can read it? Or raise a hand? Yeah, okay, see, I'm getting thumbs up. Or raise hand or thumbs up. Okay, thank you. All right, okay, so you can read it. Okay, at least most of you can read it. So I'll try to zoom in on it as we need to. Okay, so I'd like to kind of look at these kind of side by side. Let me see if I can zoom this up a little bit. All right, so zoom it up a little bit. All right, I don't need so much. And I think my application can take up a little less screen estate, doesn't need this much space. Okay, so I come to my website, tell me the secret to life, and when I click it, you will notice, let's see if I can show you here, but down here, you see that when I click secret to life, it's taking me to /secret. Okay, it's taking me to /secret. Now, when I look at my code for my demo, so the home page is tell me the secret to life. And the secret page, before it tells me the great secret, it first says go to the login page unless I have session information, meaning unless I'm logged in already, please go to the login page. Okay, so it's going to redirect me. So when I click secret to life, it just redirects me to the login page instead of the secrets page. Okay, what happens when I click login with GitHub? When I say login with GitHub, if you look down here, it shows that login with GitHub actually takes me to the GitHub website. All right, and I don't know if you can see this. If we can zoom it up a little bit, does it help? The login basically takes me to GitHub's login page for OAuth authorization, and it provides GitHub with two things. One is a client ID. This ID identifies my OAuth demo application to GitHub. Okay, so GitHub knows, oh, I know which application is trying to access this account information. And the second part of this URL is the scope, which says only this is only to grant access to the user's email. Okay. Oh, excuse me. I don't know if you can see that scope information down here. So there's some scope information down here. Okay. So if I look at my code, login, right? So my login page says login with GitHub, and it essentially creates a URL, which is GitHub login OAuth authorize. And the link has this URL with some parameters, and the parameters are the client ID, which is the basically my application's identification number on GitHub. I had to go to GitHub earlier and authorize this application to be able to do OAuth with GitHub. And also the scope that I'm interested in. The scope is simply user and email information about the user. Okay, so let me quickly show you that, excuse me. So I'm going to stop being a user for a moment, and I'm going to go and look at my developer settings on GitHub. In my developer settings, as as a developer, Soumya Ray, I have developed some apps that ask GitHub for OAuth permission. Here's a few of them. Credence is obviously one of them. I've got some other applications. And OAuth demo is one of them. So I had to go into OAuth apps and create a new app. So you will have to do the same thing. For your application, you will need to go into Facebook, Google, or GitHub, or whoever your provider is, and register your application with them. So I had to go register OAuth demo. Let's go look at my information. Here's my client ID. So GitHub has given my application OAuth demo two things: a client ID and a client secret. The client secret is, so the client ID is like a username for my application, and the client secret is like a password for my application. All right. And I'm allowed to do other things like give it a logo of my application and so on and so forth, the name of my application. Look at this homepage. What is the homepage of my application? A couple of interesting things here. Okay, the description. One important thing is I have to tell GitHub once you've authorized a user excuse me, once a user authorizes my application to get GitHub information, where should you send them back to? So this is called a callback URL. It's telling GitHub, once you've like logged the user in and they've authorized access to my application and everything, and you're done talking to them, please send them back to this URL, which is just on my local computer, and slash GitHub callback. All right. So let's go back to here. So now I'm going to click login with GitHub. All right. And let me make this window a little bit smaller. So when I click login with GitHub, my browser is sent to talk to the GitHub application. Okay, so I'm redirecting my application sends the person when they click on login with GitHub to GitHub, and in particular to GitHub's this with the client ID and the scope. All right. Now you'll notice the next part of this conversation, the next two steps are entirely between the browser and GitHub. My application is not involved in the next two things that is going to happen. Okay, my application only comes back into the picture way down here with the callback. Okay, what's going on? What's the user doing with GitHub? Well, what happens is, first of all, GitHub will ask the user to log in if they're not already logged in. Okay, so for example, let me just go for a second and well, I don't want to log out of GitHub because then I have to log in again. If I'm not already logged in with GitHub, then GitHub will first redirect me to a GitHub login page. You didn't see that earlier because I'm already logged in with GitHub. Okay, so GitHub will take me to a login page where I have to prove to GitHub who I am as a user. Okay, and then after that, if I'm logged in, I don't have to do this login process. If I'm not logged in, I have to log in with GitHub. After that, that's when the authorization happens, and GitHub sends me to this page to authorize this app. Okay, it's actually the same it's the same URL that I was sending the user to originally. This login OAuth authorize. So if once it's confirmed that I'm logged in, it sends me back to this authorized page. So let me click this authorized page. I'm already logged in, so it won't have to log me in. It takes me to this authorized page. Okay, and this is the authorized page that you're seeing right here. And on the authorized page, it'll give me all this information and it'll tell me, look, here's the OAuth demo application. It's asking for permission. How does it know it's the OAuth demo application? Because it looks at the client ID and it looks me up. It looks up the application using the client ID. And it says it's asking for your personal information, in particular your email address. How does it know I'm asking for email address? Because remember in the URL, I provided a scope. So it's now telling me the information about that scope right here. It's telling me it wants your personal email address. Okay. And then once I authorize it and I say yes, then let's see what happens. Can you see the link to this? No, you cannot. Okay. So once I click authorize, GitHub will now authorize my application to access the SomiArray account. And then it will redirect me back to the callback URL it'll redirect my browser back to the callback URL that I had set up with GitHub. All right. So, oops, where am I here? So I say authorize show me array, and now it says you're being redirected back to the callback page. Now, you didn't see the callback page because it happened too quickly. So let me just kind of show you that in my code. Okay. I do have a route for, where is it? Secrets, here it is. Callback, GitHub callback. All right. So GitHub sends me to this callback route. And what am I doing in this route? In this callback route, so let me show you a couple more details before I tell you the callback route. So it redirects me to the callback route, but it also sends to the callback route a secret code. Okay. This is a code that gives my application temporary permission to get a more long-term access token. Okay, so it sends my browser back to the callback. All right, and in the URL, I am getting a secret code. Okay, so GitHub sends my browser back to the callback URL with a secret code. Okay. What I'm now doing in this callback route is I am going to contact GitHub again, privately this time, without the user knowing. I'm going to post a request to GitHub saying, GitHub, I would like to get a secret access token. This is an API access token. Give me the API access token to access resources about this user. All right. So I call GitHub with a post request and say, please give me an access token. And I give it I'm posting it, so I pass in as a form request the client ID of my application, the client secret of my application, and this temporary code that was sent to me on the callback. All right. And what GitHub sends back to me now is an access token in the results. All right. This access token is something that I can keep in a session variable or in my database, and it'll give me long-term access to this user's resources. Okay, so the code is a short-term access code, but using this short-term access code, I can get this long-term access token. So I'm exchanging the code for the token. All right, and basically this procedure here is my application authorizing itself with GitHub with this temporary code. You can think of this code like an OTP, like a one-time password. Okay, it's like a one-time password, and that gives me a long-term access token. All right. Then I'm calling GitHub again, and this time I'm saying, hey, I should change this. I am the Credence application. Oh no, excuse me. I am the OAuth demo application. Excuse me. I have to change the code in real time. And here is, in the headers, I'm saying here is an access token. Please give me information about a user. Which user? I don't have to tell it because the access token already tells it which user I'm interested in. Okay. And then GitHub will send me back the full information that you're seeing down here about that user. So let's look at the schematic. Once the callback happens from GitHub, so I authorize GitHub, GitHub now does a callback to my application, and my application makes two quick calls to GitHub. One is a post request with my application ID, my application secret, and the one-time password, the code. And GitHub gives me a long-term access token. And now I can ask GitHub, hey, I would like to get information about a user. Please take a look at this access token. This access token tells GitHub which user I'm interested in. Okay. And now my application has information about the user, And the last thing I do in the callback is I redirect I create the session variable with all the GitHub account information in it. It's just a cookie. And I'm redirecting the user back to the secret page. And in the secret page, I tell them the secret, which involves their username and email that GitHub provided me. Okay. This is the OAuth protocol. There's variations of it, but this is one way of doing it. All right. So let me kind of maximize this again. So this is the basic OAuth protocol. It involves my browser coming to my web application. Just to quickly review it, comes to my web application. My web application tells it to log in at GitHub and redirects the browser to go to GitHub. GitHub first makes sure that I'm logged in. I didn't show that to you because I'm already logged in. And only then will it ask the user, do you authorize this application to get information about you with a particular scope? Okay. And once the user authorizes it, GitHub redirects the browser to a callback URL with a one-time password for my application, which is called a code. My web application, OAuth demo, now privately contacts Google to exchange the one-time password along with the application ID and secret for a long-term access token. This access token is only valid for this user, not for any other user. Okay. Now, for this particular user who's authorized this application, I can say, please give me information about that user with this access token. All right. I realize it's a little bit complicated, but this is how these three actors, the browser on behalf of the user, my application, and GitHub, this is the protocol. This is the dance we have to do to get a resource about the user. Okay. In this case, I'm only getting the user's account information, but I could also what's that? I could also access. Other resources if the scope allowed it, but I'm only asking for email scope. Okay. All right. Any questions? Let me go take a look at any questions that's coming in. None so far. I'll give you a second to think of any questions that you have. Any questions? You can raise your hand if you want to just ask me the question, or you can. Okay, yeah, go ahead. Go ahead. Ask me the question. Oh, you already typed it in. Why does OAuth give us an auth code to exchange for the token? Why not directly give us the token? All right, good question. So yeah, this is part of the OAuth protocol that we have to get the code. Why do that? Couple of reasons. First of all, wouldn't it be nice if if my web application could just send GitHub my client ID and secrets, and it would just give me back the access token, right? Or actually, even easier, it could redirect me back with the access token, right? Why not? The reason it doesn't want to do it is the following. If it redirects my browser with the access token is visible on the browser's URL, all right? And that can be dangerous. There could be some JavaScript or something else running on my browser that could, like some malicious JavaScript, that's going to capture that access token and do something illegal with it. So that's one reason that GitHub doesn't want to give me the access token right in the callback URL. It's too dangerous. It should be kind of kept private. And it doesn't want the user to see that access token. Okay. Instead, it wants the application to privately ask it for the access token. All right. So the application has to make a separate request for the access token without the browser being involved, because the browser can be dangerous. There could be other stuff running on the browser that could capture that access token. So GitHub says, okay, fine, I'm done with the user now. Put the user to the side and wants to talk privately to my application. Say, hey, a user has authorized you. Here's a one-time password called a code. and the user has to provide me the code. The browser has to provide me with that code. Okay. Well, what's preventing the browser from directly talking to GitHub now? One thing that, what if the browser says, what if the browser directly talk to GitHub and say, here's the code, give me the access token? It can't do that for a couple of reasons. One is, if there was some malicious JavaScript running on my browser, it needs to know my application's client ID and secrets. It doesn't know that. All right. So the browser cannot directly access GitHub for the access token. My web application only knows these two things, particularly the secret is really secret. So only my web application knows these things, and it uses the code to get the access token. Okay. The other thing is, depending on how strict GitHub is, GitHub could try to ensure that the person making this request for the access token is coming from the URL that it could try to make sure that it's coming from this URL. It could try to make sure it's really this API if it wanted to. It could look up the IP address if it wanted to and make sure it's really the application asking me. But I think it really doesn't do that. I think it really just makes sure that the application can provide its client ID and client secrets. Okay, so that's how GitHub makes sure that whoever gets the access token, whoever's asking for the access token, is my web application, not the browser or some other agent that managed to just intercept this conversation. Does this answer your question? All right. Okay. All right. So I hope that helps. And one more thing, GitHub also doesn't want my application to come back like 3 years later and get the access token. So I believe this code is something like a one-time password. It's short-lived. It might only live for like minutes or maybe even seconds. I don't know. All right. So you kind of have to like get that token right away. All right. So this is how GitHub keeps the user or the browser in particular out of the conversation when it passes back the token. All right. Is that good? Does that answer your question? All right. So, okay, so a little follow-up question. So the code is publicly shown in the URL. The access token is encrypted in HTTPS. Yes, the code is publicly available to the browser in the URL. The browser can see it. Okay. But the access token, you're right, is an HTTPS conversation between my application and GitHub. It's secret. Moreover, this post request does not involve the browser. My web application is making a direct post request to GitHub. The browser is not involved in this case. So there's two layers of security. First of all, the browser is not involved. And second of all, yes, you are right. The access token request must usually be made. And let me make sure it is really over HTTPS, otherwise I'll be scared. Yes. Excuse me, where is the callback? Yeah, the callback makes the request for the token using an HTTPS route. Okay, it's on HTTPS. Okay. So yes, this is an HTTPS request for the access token. All right. Okay, great. So this is how OAuth works in the simple example. And I've provided you some rough code, like roughly the code for this OAuth demo. Feel free to take a look at it. And there's a URL here to access it. I do suggest if you want to download and play with this, it'll take you a couple of steps because you will have to go make an OAuth demo application on GitHub to get a client ID and a client secrets, okay? But the instructions are at this URL. If you look at the app.rb, it'll provide you instructions. And you can kind of see the different steps for login, for callback, etc., etc. Okay? Okay. So a little pictorial view of OAuth. OAuth actually begins long before the user, you need the user's permission. You need, as a developer, you need to first go into GitHub or Facebook or Google, whichever, whoever's your OAuth provider, and you need to set up your application to do OAuth. And you need to tell it what the callback URL is. So you need to do that in the very beginning before any users arrive, okay? And then when the user is trying to log in, we will send them to GitHub to do the login, and GitHub will also ask them to authorize your application. In my case, I was already logged in, so you never saw this login window, okay? So you only saw this authorize window. Once the user authorizes, the browser sent to the callback URL along with a secret code in the URL. All right. And my application has to handle this callback from from GitHub, and it has to use the code that came as part of the callback and exchange it along with the client ID and client secret for an access token. This is a fake access token. Okay. And then I have to make a GET request with this access token in the HTTP header to actually get the resources. All right. From the user's point of view, from the user's point of view, let me jump back to and I'm going to move this back to this window here. From the user's point of view, let me go back to my settings. This time, forget that I'm a developer. Let me go back to pretending I'm a user. From the user's point of view, if I go to my settings in GitHub and look at applications, I will see all the applications which are authorized to access my account, particularly through OAuth. If I go to the authorized OAuth apps, now I'm not a developer, I'm a user, and these are all the applications that can access my account information on GitHub. All right, and OAuth demo is one of them. And it says here, demo, this is the description I gave it, and it tells me the permission was read-only access to my email address, and anytime I want, I can revoke that token. All right. Okay. Great. So this is a quick demonstration of OAuth. Okay. Let's take a quick break. We'll come back, and in the last hour today, we will talk about how do we do this for our actual application, because our actual application is a little bit more complicated. Our actual application involves not just a web application, but also web API. To do OAuth, which of these two should be talking to GitHub? The web application or the web API? All right. Who takes responsibility for handling the callback with the code, getting the access token, getting the account information? Like, what do I do when I have a distributed application? Now, what are the options? Like, which part of my system talks to GitHub to do OAuth? We'll discuss that after we take a break, okay? So feel free to write any questions in the meantime, but I'm going to stop the stream for a moment. And